All right. Welcome, everyone, to the Bonfire Build Along Slender Stalker. I'll be your host, Scott. Nice to meet you. So, for those of you tuning in, I will be monitoring the chat. This is a very collaborative type of build along. So, the idea here being that as I go through this, at any point, if you have any questions or concerns, anything like that, feel free to bring it into the chat. Happy to address it as we go along. So we are here for exactly 1 hour. So some of these things are going to go fast. But given that Bonfire is still a very new platform, I do want to kick things off with the basics, just to make sure that those of you at home can install Bonfire and play along as we go. And so to kick things off, this first little tidbit might be stuff that you guys already know, but I want to give a glimpse into the final product first. And that is, if you go to, let me pull it up real quick. If you go to store.steampowered.com and you install Steam, right? I want to make sure everybody knows how to get to this stuff. So you install Steam. It's going to look a little something like this when it finishes installing. Let me go to the feature page here. Okay. And then once you launch Steam, what you're going to want to do is you want to go into the search bar here, type in Bonfire, and we're the free one. Okay. And this is the easiest way to get a hold of Bonfire today. We're live now. You can download it now. It's 100% free. It is early access, and that's just because we are actively still developing this platform, and you as the community members have a chance to influence what we develop next. So please do get involved, provide feedback, reviews, etc. And so what you'll do here is you'll just click install, which will then put it into your library, and then you hit play. This will say play instead of stop. And that will bring you to this page. So you'll have a login screen before this, so you can either continue as guest or log into your account. And we have Ready Player Me integration. So you can import any Ready Player Me avatar you want. For those of you not familiar with Ready Player Me, that is a system that is not us, but they're a separate company that have some really cool character creation tools. You can dress them up, create an avatar that looks like you, and then use that avatar across all the different games that support it. We thought that was really interesting and wanted to support it because we believe that identity is part of self-expression. And so being able to create a character that looks the way you want to look and make that be the character you use in your games is important. The second one that you'll see on the right here, this is for your book library. So to get into the basics of Bonfire a little bit here, traditionally, when we talk about a game, you would think of it as a standalone application you have to develop, deploy, install, right? So like Baldur's Gate 3, standalone game. In Bonfire, we wanted to change that a little bit. And so instead of having to constantly redeploy full-blown applications, instead, we've wrapped experiences into what we call books. And each one of these books is basically just a text file that sits on our servers that you can then add to your library via its share code. So all these here that you see here, you can add them to your library today. So Bonfire Slenderman, for example, there's the share code. You just punch it into here, press enter, and it would load onto your player. We are also deploying Slenderman in particular, since it is one of our more fleshed out games. We are going to be sending that out as a separate application as well, just to prove that we can do it and make it a little easier for those of you who enjoy that particular game. But the point of Bonfire here is to make it to where anything you create on the Bonfire Builder, you can share with your friends, share with the world with just a simple share code. There's no additional install required, nothing. So when I click on Bonfire Slenderman here, and I click Launch Book, what this is now doing is it's opening up that text file, and that text file tells the player everything that needs to be pulled down for the first chapter of the book, and I'll go into more detail there in a minute. So I'm streaming, so the load time is going to be a little bit longer than usual here, but it usually loads pretty quick. There we go. And so now I'm in the experience, I'm not going to spoil anything, but essentially, you can walk up, grab the flashlight, and the game begins. And then when I'm done with the game, I hit the escape key, exit book, takes me back, and I can jump into a different book. Now, again, this is early access. This is not the final UI, but I just wanted to give you a sneak peek of the Slender Man book itself, which is the spirit of what we're going to be trying to recreate today, as well as make sure that you guys know how to jump into the experiences that already exist. So from here, what I'd like to do is just jump straight into the fun part of Bonfire, at least for me, and that is the builder. Now, the reason why I'm showing this in Unity Editor is because while we already have Bonfire deployed, this is the launcher, this is what it looks like. We've got Builder, Sparkifier, Mapifier Player. I want to make sure that this is using the most up-to-date builder, so that way when we do our next update, which is coming in early next week, all of the changes and improvements that we've made, you guys will have this video to reference on how to use that. However, most of what I'm doing today is the same as in the builder that's already deployed. So if you're following along, you can absolutely do that just by downloading Steam, installing Bonfire, and then clicking this builder button right here. Okay. Now, since I'm on this screen really quick, I do want to quickly kind of map out what these different apps are for. So Bonfire is a content creation platform. We developed it really to try and create a simpler, more accessible version of Unity and Unreal. Unity and Unreal are great products. We love them. Those of you who are programmers and artists and love to get into the weeds of things, we all love to develop content on those platforms. However, they have their hurdles. They have their complications and difficulties. And so what we wanted to try and do at Dimension X is we wanted to create a simpler content creator, something that is drag and drop simple, no programming experience required, no artistry skills necessarily required, and just give you something that you can create your ideas and get them out there for your friends and family in the wider world to interact and engage with without ever having to go through the headaches of actually compiling code, deploying something. So that's what gave birth to Bonfire. And through that, we created a couple of different apps here to help the process along. So Builder is where you'll create your content. This is the actual creation of the book files themselves, and you publish those books through Builder, which then makes them accessible on the player, which you saw earlier, where I had the avatar on the left and the book on the right. Click launch. We also have Sparkifier, which allows you to take content, music, images, video, 3D models, and wrap them into a file type that we call a Spark. More about that in a minute. Similar to Sparkifier, we also have Mapifier. Maps are the non-interactive background geometry, right? So for example, Baldur's Gate 3, to use as an example, the map that you're walking around on would be the map that Mapifier would generate. And then the boxes and the characters and the creatures that you're interacting with on that geometry, those would all be sparks, right? So I'll get a bit more into that here in a minute. So when you first open up the builder, either through, actually this exists in both builder and player, you're going to be greeted with a login screen. We are working towards making this single sign-on with Steam. Right now it's not. And all you need to do is, if you don't have an account already, you just click this Need an Account button. That'll then bring up this page here where you type in your email and a password. And then we'll have a quick verification step where we just send you an email with a verification code, you punch it in, and you're good to go. Okay? We do this because we want to make sure we're keeping track of what books and sparks are yours versus someone else's, right? So I bring that up because recently in the gaming community, there's been some fun, let's call it, surrounding PlayStation Network sign-in on Helldivers for the PC version of it. This is not that. Okay, this is not us trying to do anything weird like that. This is purely, we want to be able to know what data belongs to you, so that way we can appropriately protect that data and make it accessible to you and only you, except for the pieces that you want to share out with the world. So that's the whole point. We're going to make it streamlined eventually. It's not that right now. Please be patient. We'll get it there. But for now, you just simply create an account and then log in. And then that brings you to the My Books page. So if this is your first time signing in, these lighter gray rows won't exist yet. That's because they're the recent books, things you've recently accessed. You will, however, have Start New Book and Open Demo Book. Start New Book will give you a completely blank book. The demo book is our sample that we deploy with the builder to get you started if you've never used Bonfire before. So for most of you who are going to be doing this for the very first time, the demo book is definitely where you want to jump in and see how we do some things. I will save that for another video to dive deeper into it, but needless to say, definitely check it out after this video stream. For the purposes of what we're doing today, though, I'm going to start us off with a new book. Now, this pop-up here, I don't want to click right past it because this is pretty important. What this is it's a couple of hyperlinks. The first one being to our Bonfire 101 series, which I'm doing some of in this video, but we actually have entire playlists that go deeper into a lot of the different aspects of Bonfire. And then we also have our documentation. So that's going to be docs.demix.dev. English, I can speak it. And anyway, that has a lot of our documentation regarding what all of the different things are, like what's a spark, what's a map, what's a chapter, what's a book, all that jazz. And then also has some best practice notes and things of that sort. It is an evolving site. It's still relatively new, but we will be adding to it with each release. And right now we are on a 2-week release cycle. So every 2 weeks, we're trying to put out more content. Kendro, what's a spark? To answer that question, well, actually, I'm about to. So let me just dive right into it. So a spark is, in effect, a visual component and a logic component combined together into a single file. So to think of it another way, if I just got back from an event at a car experience location, so I'll use that as an example. If I had a Lamborghini, right? I've got this beautiful car in front of me, and I've got it as the 3D model. Traditionally, in Unity and Unreal, I would have to import that 3D model and then write a whole bunch of code to actually be able to drive it, right? Or do stuff with it. We wanted to get away from that. So instead, what happens is I've got my 3D model, and I want to actually pair functionality to that model and have that exist in one file. That way, I can have drag and drop simplicity to use that in whatever experiences I want to use it in. That, in effect, is a spark. So to give it a deeper example here, if I go into, say, one of these animals, right? So all of these different files here, these are all files that live on my computer. And I can grab any one of them. Like, let's grab this camel. You can drag it in. It's now loading in that file. And now I've got a visual of a camel. Let me go to first person view here. Right? It's got animations that are playing. That's not much of a trick, but it also has traits and behaviors in that same file, right? So I'm not having to open up Visual Studio. I'm not having to go write code. Instead, the creator of this Spark, the person that made it, and I'll get more into that process in a second, was able to choose things to expose to me as a book builder that I can now play with in a way that's much more simple. So for example, I can go in here and I can say, okay, I want this to be a smallish camel. So I'm going to shrink them to 75% his size, right? I can also, I've got health counters here that I can play with. I can also say whether or not he's grabbable if I wanted to pick him up, interactable if I want to interact with them. I'm going to go ahead and do interactable. And then on causes effects, oh, and I can also move them around here like this as well, right? So you got two ways to move sparks. I can move it using the map editor, which is a nice little top-down view, or I can move it using the gizmo and map explorer, which gives you more of what the player will see. And so for making it actually do something, I've got causes effects. Causes are things that you can do to a spark. Effects are things that a spark can do in response. So for example, I made it interactable here a minute ago.
So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to say, okay, when interacted with, I want it to do a nice little spin, right? So when interact happens, I want it to rotate 180 degrees relative to its current location and take a second to do that, right? So now what I can do is if I unfreeze the behavior tree for a minute, I can walk up to this guy, and when I interact with him, he spins and does 180. And that is the closest to actual programming you need to get to in Bonfire, right? Pretty cool. And then what I'm able to do, if I wanted to just publish this very simple experience, I can hit share. And actually, let me just give this a test, publish, DMX, right? Switch it to first person camera to start with. So this is all the book metadata. You can set it to whatever you want. Okay, this is my share code. I'm going to go ahead and copy that, publish it to release, because why not? Publish successful. And now I can go over to the player, add the share code. There's my test publish. Live demos, so fun. So hit a bug there, 1 second. There we go. Hello, Shin, nice to see you. Okay, so we're gonna get back into this here. Wait for it to finish loading. There we go. Test publish. Launch book. And there's that camel. I can interact with it and it spins, right? So this is the equivalent of a hello world in Bonfire here. I literally just created a brand new book, drag and dropped a spark in there, made it do a spin when I interact with it, published it, and now any of you can play the same lovely make the camel spin experience if you wish. Now, obviously that's not where we're stopping, but I just wanted to give you a good idea of how quick you can go from an idea to something that people can play, including, and this is something that's not talked about all that much on our Steam page yet, although you can see it in the marketing video in this trailer here. This player is not just for Windows and Mac. It also is going to be working on iPhones and Androids. And we also are going to be releasing a VR player as well for Quest and possibly Pico. And so that changes the game considerably, right? Because now you're talking about not just making an experience that can be played on Windows and Mac, but also this same experience can be played on mobile. So, for example, I've got a demo version of the player here. Might have spoken too soon. Hold on. You may have to take my word for it. It's misbehaving on my phone right now. But we have a version of the player working on mobile today. And what you would see, if I could show it, is it would be touch controls, right? So rather than keyboard and mouse, it automatically adjusts to the touch controls. And then you can do the same kind of experiences. So really intuitive stuff. We try to keep it as simple as possible, constantly looking for ways to improve it. But that's not why you guys are here, right? We want to go into the Slender Stalker side of things. So let's go ahead and get into that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and do a brand new book just to wipe the slate clean. And let's talk about a bit more what a book is. So as I mentioned before, a book is just a text file. It's got a bunch of information regarding what your chapter tree looks like, what kind of sparks you need, and in what chapter do those sparks need to be placed, and different other configuration information like this spark is placed here, etc. Right? And so chapters are, if you've ever done the choose your own adventure book where you say, okay, I'm on page 3, you're reading the story, and then it says, if you make this decision, go to this page. If you make this other decision, go to this other page. Same concept here, except we just make them chapters, right? So I've got chapter 1 here, so I can say intro, and then I can create a new chapter, and I can call this
level 1, right? And then I can connect them and connect to end. And then I can say another one and then say, okay, this is level 1A, right? And so what I've done here is I've made it to where the player, based on the decision they make in the book, can then decide which chapter they go to. And these lines dictate which chapters can go where. So for example, if I wanted level 1A to also be able to go to level 1, I could totally do that. I could even say, oh, well, level 1 also needs to be able to go back to intro. I can do that, right? I completely control what the flow of the chapters looks like. And then each chapter contains a map, which is what we're looking at here. There's a very basic map right now. This is the default one, right? And if I were to change that map, let's say to the suburbia, that's going to take a hot minute. While that's loading, what's going to happen here is we're loading in the non-interactive geometry, right? This would be that background stuff I was talking about before. So here it is, right? And then I'm going to go ahead and save this book. I'm going to call this Live Build Along. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and save this. There we go. And so now if I want to jump to level 1 here, you'll see it puts me back to the grassy plain. And then go back to intro. So Shin, the multiplayer side of this, we are actively trying to get pushed forward. We don't have it out yet just because we're trying to make sure that all of the foundational stuff is solid before we start adding additional players into the mix. So multiplayer is coming, but it is not out currently. So right now, the intent that we're trying to set up here is you can make books, you can decide how scores get calculated in those books, and we're going to have a leaderboard on the website for Demex. We're also going to have like book of the week type stuff. We're going to try and make a lot of community content, community engagement, game jams, hackathons, that kind of thing, just to make sure that all the foundational stuff is solid first. And then what'll be really cool is then when we roll out the multiplayer support, that should then add a whole nother element of fun on top of the books that already exist, as well as new possibilities for the new books that you guys want to create from there. So just for now, to be clear, it's single player, but our intent is to be multiplayer and cross-platform multiplayer as well. So whether you're on your phone or a VR headset, you'd be able to be in the same experience together. So as you can see here, when we loaded back up the intro, we're back in chapter 1, right? And so let's talk a bit more about how we set up the map, right? So I changed the map to suburbia. That changed the baseline geometry here, all the non-interactive geometry. So I can collide with it, I can jump on it, I can walk around, etc. But if I try and interact with it, I'm just going to get the default waving animation that our players do, right? So if your player ever waves, that means that you try to interact and there's nothing there, right? So what we want to do now is we want to actually populate this level with things that make it do things. So for starters, let's talk about the different kinds of sparks that exist. So we have, to start with, entity sparks. The camel that you saw earlier would be an example of an entity spark. In fact, let me go ahead and pull up Sparkifier because that shows it right here. We have entity, config, symbol, and audio, right? Entities are things that have a anchor in real 3D space, right? So if I go back to the builder here, this spawn point here, let me go in the map editor, this guy here, that would be an entity spark. The player itself is also an entity spark. It's just one that's tagged as player. We also have a reflection probe here. In the Spark browser, all of these, so entities, hi-fi, low poly, etc. These are all entity sparks, right? So any of them I can drag in and I can go ahead and anchor it to a place on the map. However, there's also config sparks. Config sparks don't necessarily have a physical anchor in 3D space, but they still affect the book. So for example, we have a skybox one here. So right now we've got this beautiful blue skybox. This is the default one. But if we're making a horror game, that's not really what we're after, right? So let's go ahead and go into config folder. And then we got a skies folder here. And so we can kind of go through and pick the sky that we think will work best. I'm going to go for probably night 3. Boom. Look at that. Skybox changed, right? And remember, all sparks have behaviors and traits. So if I click on night 3, you can see I can actually modify the ambient brightness and the exposure, right? So that allows me to make it a little bit more spooky, but it's still not spooky enough. So let me go ahead and look at the sun here. This is one of our default must-have config sparks. And for the sun, I can do a couple things. I can change the time of day. And I can also change the brightness, right? So you can start to see it's becoming a bit more spooky, right? But for the purposes of making sure we can see what we're doing, we'll pop it back up to 50 here. All right, so we got our skybox changed over. Another thing that we might want to do is we might add some lights. And so what we can do there is we can go back over to environment. We've got things like portal, reflection probes, spawn points, triggers, and lights. And I can drag a light in. All right, and I can go ahead and move that up and around. Right? And as you can see, as I'm moving it, the altitude and the position are changing. I can change its name, right? So I can call this, for example, intro UI light. And then I can also change its type. We've got point and spot supported today, but we can do way more. And we'll roll those out later. I can also change the intensity. So I can go 50 or I can go 1, right? And then I can also change the color. So we want a nice dark red color. So let's go to 1500 here. All right, so get a nice spooky red going on, right? Reddish orange. Cool. So we've got our spawn point, our reflection probe, but our spawn point is kind of not where we want it, right? So for a Slender Stalker horror type game, we really, here, let me go to first person here. We really want to kind of set them up to where they're at the end of the street here, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the map editor. I'm going to go ahead and grab these two, and I'm going to move them over here and rotate them. Boom. All right, cool. So now when I jump into this chapter, it's going to spawn me right about here. All right, cool. All right, so what that then means is I want to provide a UI that lets people know what to expect. So to do that, we've got two options. We've got two types of UI. You've got screen space UI and world space UI. And to support both of those, what we did was we created some symbol sparks. So if I go back to the Sparkifier here, right? Symbol sparks are anything that's going to be basically used as a UI element, right? So these are things like your input boxes, buttons, things of that sort, 2D pictures that you want to make sure you're displaying on the screen. Those are all symbol sparks. So just to recap, we have entity sparks. Those are things with visual representation in the 3D world. Config sparks, those are things that don't necessarily have 3D visualization. They sometimes do, like in the case of the skybox, but they absolutely do still affect the book in some way. They've got their own dedicated tab. Then you got symbol sparks, which do not get placed in the 3D world at all, but instead get put into UI containers, which I'm going to show you here in a minute. And then you have audio sparks, which are config sparks, but specifically designed for playing audio. That can be sound effects, background music, you name it. Okay. So going back into here, for UI, I'm going into the Spark browser, going to symbols, UI containers, and we've got a couple options here. For the purposes of what we're trying to accomplish today, we're going to need two types of UI containers. One already exists, and that's our default HUD. So this is the one where if I put something on the screen here, like let's say I did a big old button. Let me
grab this button, make it 5 times the size, place it dead center, and then go to Map Explorer. Nothing shows up. Okay, but when I press play, there's my button. Okay. Here, let me disable that. There we go. All right, so what I did just there, by default, when you unclick out of play mode, it'll reload the chapter back to whatever your chapter defaults were. That can be problematic if you're in the middle of developing the chapter. So we put this checkbox here to where you can say, okay, if you're just trying to pop in and out of play mode, but you're not wanting to reset, you can uncheck that box and it makes that easy. Okay, so getting back into it, default HUD, this is a symbol spark. Default HUD is a UI container. This one paints directly to the player's screen. But then we also have a world space or a billboard container, which will give you something that looks like this. And this allows you to place UI elements inside the 3D world. Also, pro tip, if you're trying to place things and you realize, oh, hey, wait a minute, I can't really, am I going to jump and click at the same time? That's not really good. What you can do is you can go to toggle physics here. And now that jump button just raises me up off the ground, and Alt lowers me, right? And so this makes it a little easier to be able to just grab this and just kind of line her up where I want her. There we go. And then I can turn physics back on. Good to go. And in case you were wondering, yes, you can put yourself through the floor. It's not recommended. But even if you forget and you accidentally toggle physics back on while you're underneath the ground, don't worry. Eventually, you'll spawn back at wherever your spawn point was. Okay? All right, so we've got our UI billboard container here. Let's see here. Yes, regarding the persona system. So let me take a minute to talk about that really quick. The persona system is a player-specific system that we are taking our time with because we need to factor in multiplayer into it. But it will actually allow you to change the characteristics of the player spark, right? Which is an entity spark. So right now, you're limited to just a Ready Player Me avatar, right? Whatever the avatar is that the user selects when they first launch the book. And so that means that for things like driving a car, etc., you have to always factor in the fact that you've got this player model that has to be in there somewhere that is at the controls controlling things. With the persona system, we're doing away with that. We're getting rid of that limitation and making it instead to where characters can take on different personas. And what that will do effectively is it will change the way the character looks and behave, or more specifically, the way the player looks and behaves. So then you could get into a situation where if I want to drive a car, rather than it being the player character in the car, actively, constantly interacting with the car, the player can just become the car. Way easier, right? Way easier to do it that way. And so it's still in the works. It's not ready yet. Once that's out, though, that'll make it a lot easier for racing style games and things like that. For now, we're a bit more limited, but again, this is early access. We're rolling out new features constantly. So getting back into what we're doing here with the billboard container, this then becomes, let me call it something else here. So I can control the resolution. I can make it rotate towards the camera. All the same traits before. Remember, whoever makes the spark defines what's exposed here, which is pretty cool, right? So it can be anything you want, right? And same with the behaviors, causes and effects. These are all defined by the creator of the spark. So if I go into the Sparkifier here, and let's say I wanted to create an entity spark, right? We have these Ember script panels. Ember is our runtime scripting language. You can create any cause, any effect, any trait you want using those Ember scripts, right? And so that then gives you full customizability to be able to have full control over what a spark can or cannot do. We even have an option in here where you can pack in additional data. So for example, if I wanted to make it to where I have a model that changes its color and skin, like the actual textures, depending upon certain traits that are selected, I could add those additional texture elements as supplemental data, have a Ember effect that allows me to trigger that, and then the model file here to then know what to apply those textures to. All of that's possible in Sparkifier. And then when you build it, it then becomes accessible inside the builder.
right? And so that's really where the magic happens, is that those of us who are more in the weeds, right, of willing to take those steps of making those custom Spark templates, as we call it, can make some really cool things that can then be easily reused by others with drag and drop simplicity, right? So imagine, if you will, if I wanted to, I could just sit back and just roll out new content constantly. Like, okay, here's a pack of dragons, here's a pack of race cars, here's this and that. And then if you want to use that in your experience, you don't have to open up Visual Studio and the Unity editor and do a whole bunch of complicated things. Instead, you literally just say, oh, thank you very much. Here's the asset config panel. Let me go ahead and download, Hi-Fi Dungeons or Low Poly Village. And now I'm getting a pack of assets that I can immediately start using, right? So I can go in here to Low Poly Animals, for example, and I've got a boar that I can just drag in. Boom, right? And so as a book author, my job is to focus on what I care about most, which is the book, telling the story, right? And then those who are making the sparks can focus on making those cool sparks with all the different causes, effects, etc. So I got sidetracked a little bit there, sorry. But basically, what were we doing? Right, UI billboard. So going back to the UI billboard here, now in the UI editor, I have this billboard as an option. I'm going to change this name just to make it easier to keep tabs on. This is the intro UI. So we're going to go to UI editor, intro UI. And what we want on here is we want a symbol spark text. All right. That's a bit difficult to read. So let's make a couple changes here. So first things first, we're going to make the font size 128. And then we're going to make the actual size something like, I don't know, 1800? Nope, too much. Let's do 1200 by 400. It doesn't need to be that. Let's do 200. There we go. Okay. And so size adjusts the box here. And then font size adjusts the size of the text render. I want to be careful, I'm specific there. Scale then takes whatever the text render size is and scales it. The reason why that's important is this. If you scale up the text, but the font size is small, you're going to get aliasing. You're going to get that like hard stair-stepping edge, right? By increasing the font size first and not increasing scale first, you're going to get crisper text, right? So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to center it. Okay. And then I'm going to take off snapping here. And I want the position to be 0, dead center. And let's put this at, what, 350? Yeah, that looks good. And then I also want to change the color. This is a horror game. We want red. And then because this is something that's important, we need to make sure it's legible, I can also do Arial black for the text, kind of bold it out. And I can say, welcome to Slender Stalker. Well, still, okay, let's go a little down. Let's see here, size, maybe 1400? 1500. Was 1500? Okay. This is basically, some things never change. If I was in the Unity editor or Bonfire, you're still messing with values remains the thing that just happens. All right, welcome to Slender Stalker. And then the next thing I want to do is I want to say, I want a table. Yes, I want a table. Let's get a table rolling. So I want to go into Hi-Fi. Suburbia would have a table. Let's go with props interior. Kitchen table. Boom. Okay. So what I want to do with the table now is I want to put a flashlight on it. So that way we can tell our users, this is what you need to pick up to start the game, right? So what I'm going to do next is I need my flashlight. Now this one, what I did was I cheated a little bit. I used a product called, well, let me preface it with this. I am not a 3D artist, right? So as part of these build alongs, I want to make sure I am experimenting with all the possibilities of how our users might want to use our tool to make sure we're supporting all of those workflows, right? So if you are a 3D artist, for starters, Blender exports directly from that tool GLB and GLTF file types, right? That is what Bonfire ingests, right? So they're not FBXs, they're not OBJs, they're GLBs. We do that for optimization reasons. So any GLB file that you have, you can import just by hitting plus, create, make it an entity or any other Spark template type you want, give it a name, my custom Spark, and then you would browse to your GLB file, add any supplementals you need to, hit create, and then boom, it's in, right? Or you can also use Sparkifier to do the exact same thing, but using a prettier workflow, right? In the advanced mode here, you can see we can even dive a little deeper. We've got all these different Spark templates that add additional functionality out of the box. And then you can add additional functionality on top of that using Ember scripts. Okay. So what we want to do here is I made a custom Spark. Where's my Sparks? Where is it? Flashlight. Where'd you go? There he is. So this was something that was made using a tool called Meshy, which is procedural AI generation. I know, AI, it's a hot button thing, but hey, I'm not picking sides. I just want to make sure that the workflows work, right? So in this instance, Meshy generated this model, exported it as a GLB, textured it, etc. And so within, I think it took 5 minutes, I was able to get myself a decent looking flashlight. Is it final render? No, but it works for prototyping, and that's good enough for me for now. So what I can do now is I can say, okay, I am going to go ahead and reduce the size here. Let's do third the size. Get it close to the table. And then now there's a couple things that I want to do here. Step one, I want to attach a light to the front of it, because a flashlight without a light doesn't really give you much, right? So I'm going to go back to my Spark browser. I'm going to go to environment. I'm going to grab a light. Albert says, live tutorials are the best. I'm trying one right now by following this tutorial. Yes, awesome. That's the whole point, right? That's why it's a build along. So please be trying this out with me and let me know what you think. You know, because at the end of the day, the whole point of the early access is we want to make sure that that it's working for you guys, right? Because I'm biased. I helped make the tool. So for me, I'm going to be like, oh yeah, this is the right way to do it. But you guys might look at that and go, no, right? And we need to know that kind of stuff. All right, so I've got my light. I'm going to change it to a spotlight. Okay. And so then what that's going to do is I need to, here, let me up the intensity for a minute so I can tell where the heck it's pointed. I believe, nope, not Y. What am I talking about? I want to do, is it X or Z? Nope, it's going to be X. Okay. There we go. No. There we go. Spot, size, range. Let's put the range up. There we go. Okay, so it's a spotlight. I'm going to set the size outer to 90. There we go. That looks better. Let's try 120. Okay, works good. And then for the color, I don't want it to be spooky red because that's just going to make visibility difficult. But I don't want it blue either or white. So we're just going to kind of play with it a little bit. 3000 looks to be a good sweet spot, right? And right now, this is not going to follow the flashlight at all, right? So what I need to do is I need to attach it. So the way I do that today, we're working on making this easier. But the way I do that today
is we're going to take advantage of one of the debugging tools that exists in Bonfire. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go to modifiers. We're going to go to debug, create a debug node. And then with the light selected, I want to say attach on. This is a big guy. So what this lets me do is similar to how Unity and Unreal have the ability to have like parent-child relationships with the transforms. That's what this creates under the hood. So what I can do is I can say, okay, I want this spark to attach to another spark. That spark is going to be my flashlight. Let me find my flashlight. There we go. And then I can control the position and rotation of that attach, right? So to start with, I want to preserve what I've got. So that's 270 on the X, it looks like. Well, let's just see what it does with 0 first. So I'm going to unfreeze. I'm going to trigger. Yeah, that's not going to work. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, what was it, 270, I think? And then we need 90 on the Y, looks like. No, negative 90. So another 270. There we go. And then it needs to go forward a bit. So is that the right one? Nope. There we go. Too much. So let's do 0.25. A little more. 0.33, I bet. Boom, look at that. Okay. So now it's attached. So if I move this guy, they move together. Like magic. So these units are supposed to be meters, JR Watchboy. However, we're still playing with it, trying to figure out what's going on, because sometimes it doesn't always do what we expect. So I think there might be some trickery happening with so for example, the flashlight's scaled down, right? So when I scale down the flashlight and the light is a child of the flashlight, then one is no longer the same one. You know what I mean? Because it's all relative. So we're working on making that more clear and understandable to the users of the tool. But for now, a little trial and error, it'll get there. Okay, now, something to keep in mind. Any effect of an effect will not persist when you save, close the book, reopen the book, which means using debug to do the attachment is not enough, right? Because the second I close and reopen the book, it's going to go away. So this is one of the reasons why we want to fix CUI. But for now, the trick is this. All you got to do is you just say on chapter start, which this always calls when the book first opens, right? Connect it there. And now when the book first loads, it'll attach the light. Okay. If it's frozen, it will not call. But in that case, that's why you've got the debug, where you can just trigger it, right? But most importantly, when you go from builder to player, this is important to make sure that that light attachment occurs when the player first loads up the book. Okay. So the next thing we want to do is we want to make this grabbable. So when I go to grab it, right, I want it to actually do a thing. I want to actually be able to pick it up. And so if I were to save this and pick it up right now, that's not helpful. The light's on my feet, right? And the reason for that is because of the way we actually do the grab. The grab animation, if I show it really quick, the grab animation is just the hand reaching out and doing this, right? Which means that the flashlight is in the correct position for that. I'm grabbing it, and it's either going to point straight up or straight down, because that's where the hand is, right? But that's not where we want it. So we need to do a little work to go ahead and fix that. And the way we're going to do that is, again, we're going to, well, first reset it to where it was. So let me just fix that really quick. Do-do-do. Do-do-do. Good enough. All right, so what I can now do is I can, with the flashlight selected, I can say when grabbed, right? I can now control what happens. And so the first thing I want to do is I actually want to cause it to not be grabbed anymore. I'm going to force drop it, right? And then because I want it to attach in a different way and also not have it be in the way of the player grabbing other items, I'm going to actually call an attach on effect, just like we did for the light on the flashlight. Except now I'm going to make it to where I'm attaching to the player, and I'm going to make it the player head because I don't want it, because the player is animated. If I attach it to a hand and they start running, the flashlight's going to, we don't want that, right? And the head is also going to have animation, but it's going to be more of the usual bob of the walking and running that a person does instead of the hand going up and down like crazy. So I'm going to attach it to the head. We're going to use the same debug trick here to go ahead and attach it now and play around with some values, right? And so if I attach it to the head, the first thing that's going to happen is it's going to literally attach it to the head, right? That is not what we want. This is not a siren head game. Okay, so we're going to need to rotate it. Looks like probably 90 on the Y. Let's see. Other way. It's always the other way. Always the other way. Okay. There we go. So now it's at least facing forward. But if I go back to first person view, that's not what we want, right? So now what we want is to go down probably by what? 2.5. There we go. And we want to go forward. Would that be forward? I think so. Let's do 0.1. No, that's to the right. That works too. And we can also just drag and slide, by the way. So let me do 0.1 here as well. There we go. Getting there. Negative 0.33. And 0.2. This is looking pretty good. All right, so now when I walk around, I've got me a handy dandy flashlight. Right? Pretty handy. And so now what I can do is I can force attach off just for debug. Okay, there we go. And so now I can select it again and move it back to the table. So I know some of these workflows are not ideal. We fully own that and recognize it. We're fixing it. We're making them better. But as you can see, with a little out of the box thinking, there's a lot that you can do with the system, even as it stands today. So just catching up the chat here real quick. Thank you so much, JR Watchboy, for calling this amazing. Genuinely, thank you, because we've worked over 2 years on this product, trying to get it to where it is today. So we're quite fond of it. Following the Spark model, in an ideal world, that flashlight spark would have been made in Bonfire and already have had the attributes, behaviors of a light shining out of it. Absolutely. You are 100% correct. So ideally, you would make a flashlight spark, right? Rather than it being a model of a flashlight that I'm then turning into a flashlight. It would be a flashlight spark where using Ember script and some other things in Sparkifier, you would then just have it out of the box, have the light, have everything else, right? But for the purposes of demonstrating this particular workflow of taking a model from an outside source like Meshi and being able to just quickly turn it into a spark, that's what I'm trying to demonstrate here, is how you can kind of kit bash things together to make whatever you want, right? And you can come up with some really cool stuff using that technology. And yes, this is, oh wait, so currently watching for Florida and playing Bonfire. I have a total of 100 hours of playtime on Steam. Thank you. Thank you, sir. And I want to recreate it to impress my classmates. Bonfire is similar to Roblox, but simple. I love it. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And yes, Wolfie, this is free. You can install Steam right now and go to town. I mean, all of it's free. There's no
provide a share code to your friends, and let them play. And so that's kind of what we're hoping is going to happen, right? Is that you guys are going to come up with all kinds of creative little stories to play through, create little scoring systems, and challenge each other with new and interesting ways to play different games and content. And we're going to have a leaderboard on our website coming out here soon, where we'll be able to rank what are the most popular books, who's the highest scorers in those books, things like that. It's going to be awesome. All right. And then eventually when multiplayer comes out, then it's going to be like, it's a whole nother genre of fun we're going to be able to do. Okay, so getting back into this really quick, the brightness of the flashlight is great for debug. However, it's too bright for our spooky game. Because if I take the brightness to 0 here, yeah, that's too bright. That's too easy. We don't want to make it that easy. So we want to go ahead and grab the, come on. There we go. The light here. We're bringing the intensity down to what? 3? Is that fair? Yeah. Yeah, that keeps it spooky. Cool. By the way, everything that I'm using today, I am making available. It'll be a Google Drive link at the end of the video. I'll be pasting it. And that'll let you download all of the custom sparks that I made for this, so that way you can use them in your own experiences. So that'll be fun as well. Yes to leaderboard. 100% agree. I'm excited for it. Okay, so we can see here that at 3, that looks a bit closer to what we're after. So we're going to go ahead and bring the brightness back up just so we can see what we're doing. And so our flashlight is more or less good to go. We've got the ability to force attach it. We've got the light automatically attaching to the flashlight. So that part is good to go, I think, right? So we can go ahead. What I'm going to do now, just to keep my board clean, so I'm going to create a new subgraph. We're going to call this flashlight setup. Sorry, that is like text for ants. Let me get closer here. Flashlight setup. Okay. And what a subgraph is, actually, I did this incorrectly. We'll use this for something else. So right now, what you want to do is, no, actually, I think I did that right. Kyle, if you're watching, let me know if I did that right. Kyle's our CTO. So anyway, we're going to call this flashlight setup. And I believe what I need to do is I need to grab all of these, do a copy, paste. Yes, love it. I love it when things work the way they're supposed to. All right, so what this now does is it makes all of these nodes in a subgraph with a title, right? So that allows me to now delete these. I'm pressing the delete key to do that, by the way. And I've got this handy little subgraph to keep my base graph clean. So the next thing I want to do is I want to put a spooky Slender Man at the end here, just looking menacingly at the player. All right, so here's what we're going to do here. I want to go into my sparks, because I made this one as well with one of our models. I'm going to drag Slender into the scene. There he is. Big, tall, and spooky. All right. I'm going to click here. We're going to give him a nice rotation. And then I want to make him a bit more aggressive. So I'm also going to lean him forward a little bit. It's going to look silly close up, but from far away, it's going to add to the appeal. I love the shadow doing what it's doing. Love that. Okay. So what I'm going to do now, so I'm going to grab a light. Environment light. Grab the light. We're going to do that red color. Bring it up close, right? Don't want it too intense. Let's do 1. Let me disable physics and get up closer here so I can see what I'm doing a bit better. There we go. I'm just going to have this guy just leaning menacingly, right? And then, of course, we're about to do the classic any horror game trick, right? The flickering light is what we want to do. So to do that, we're going to be talking about one of the more advanced features of Bonfire, which is Ember. So I've walked you through how we can use existing traits, causes, and effects to make Sparks do things. However, sometimes you need to do more than what the Spark author made available out of the box, right? And so to accomplish that, we have Ember. It's our runtime scripting language. Easy as pie. Yes, this is a game creation tool. You can try it on Steam. We are live right now on Steam, completely free to play. And you can go ahead and download it, install it, and you can actually follow along with us. Just create your account, log in, create a new book, and you can follow along with everything we're doing here. So, Ember. Let's talk about it for a minute. Ember will be, to the programmer's eye, similar to Python. And it's similar to Python in more than one way. It is plain text, spaces and enters matter. And it's also read at runtime and executed at runtime. So what that means for those who aren't programmers is it's a way for you to type out specific words, kind of like cheat codes, to be able to force your game to do certain things in certain ways, right? So I'm going to give you an example with this light. So I'm going to call this the Slender Stalker light, right? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my modifier node here, and here we got Ember. Okay. So I'm going to zoom in here. I'm going to call this flickering light, or flickering slender. Flickering light's fine. Okay. So that's the name of this node, and this light's name, if I can click on it again, Slender Stalker light. All right. That's going to come in handy here in a minute. So now I'm going to open this. That's going to open up a new tab. This is our in-builder Ember editor. Okay. So what I want to do here is I want to start writing some Ember scripts that's going to affect Sparks in the book. For the API for this, just go to docs.dimx.dev, and in there will be Ember. There will be the standard APIs. We're actually using an open source tool called Miniscript. Shout out to the dev of that. You are awesome. And we've just extended it with our own custom APIs to make it work within the Bonfire ecosystem. So an example of that would be, we have made an API called SparkRef. So I can say light equals SparkRef. Boom. And now just like that, I have access to that light. And to prove that, I can say print light. And I've got two options here. I can save to the node, which I'm going to do. Always save your work. But I can also just hit run. And let me clear the console here. And when I hit run, it's going to go ahead and print out everything I have access to for light, which you can see right here, right? So I know that's probably tiny, but I'll just read out the basics here. So basically what it's saying is I've got access to the instance name. I've got access to whether or not it's visible, whether or not it uses physics, basically anything that exists in the traits tab, I can affect using Ember, right? So what that means is I can also change whether or not it's visible. So I can go to light traits.isVisible equals, what would that be? 0, I believe. Yep. Boom. So now it's off. And now it's run on again. Right? And so you can start to see pretty quick how we can do some cool things with this, especially since any Ember script you write is still bound inside of a node, which means I can still do things like this and trigger it from other nodes. Pretty handy stuff, right? Now, for the purposes of the flicker, what we want to do, and forgive me, I'm going to have to cheat a little bit and bring up my other book to make sure that I am doing this right. Here, let me make sure I don't crash my computer. I'm going to go ahead and close out some of these just to make sure that I've got enough memory. Okay. Where's my... All right, so if I want to add a book, I can go to add book local. And then I can go ahead and grab the book I was working on earlier today. Let's
going to load up. And we are over time, so I'm going to just continue through with the Ember stuff, and we'll save the rest of it for the next time. But I do want to make sure I show off this really cool Ember bit because it's pretty cool. Where are you? Here we go. This guy. Okay, so let me just copy this. I want this. There we go. By the way, you can also do import export of these scripts. So what I could have done instead of just copy paste like that, let's say I didn't have that as an option, you can always create your scripts, export them as Ember script files, and then share them with your friends or reuse them to your heart's content, import them. Trick, that is also how you export them for the purposes of using them in Sparkifier to make your own custom causes, effects, and traits. Yeah, so real quick, what this is going to do is it's going to first grab a reference to the light. It's then going to grab a reference to whether or not it's visible. And then this is why this is really cool. We're going to make a while true loop. So what this means is this is never going to end. It's going to keep processing over and over and over again, right? And so that means we need a way to break out of that. Otherwise, we end up stuck in it constantly. And so break lets us do that, okay? And I'll try and be quick because I know some of you guys, you don't ever want to code. Totally fine. That's what the behaviors tree is for. But I just want to show how what we can do here is we can actually flicker this light using Ember, even though that's not a built-in behavior or trait, right? And so what this is going to do is it's actually going to wait to see if still run is set to off. And still run is a datum spark. Datum is really cool. It's a config spark. It's right here. Datums let you store values even across chapters. So for things like scores, or for things like saving states, we also have a state machine. This is really easy to be able to just, for example, in this instance, store a value that I can then reference in Ember or in behaviors. You can see I've got all these causes and effects. So what this is then going to do is, if I change the name to match, is it will wait until something changes this value to 0, and then it'll stop the flicker. So for example here, if I go ahead and trigger this, all right, we've got that flicker, which means if I take the sun and I drop it down to 0, right? There we go. He's looming in the distance, right? And then all I need to do to turn that off is I just change this to 0. And it stops flickering. Pretty cool, right? So there you've seen it. I've given you a basic tutorial of the way to do both the complete non-code, no-code approach, which is the flashlight setup here, as well as a more advanced approach with Ember. And our game, Slender Stalker, is in progress still, but you can get a sneak peek of it if you want by using the share code that I'll post here later. It is out to play on Bonfire Player, which is going to be this guy right here. However, we are also going to be releasing an even more developed version of the game as a standalone game later on. But feel free to play with it now. You can also, with the same share code, in Builder, you can, here, let me close this out and restart. Here we go. You can also add it remote using the share code, and that'll give you access to the book where you can then make your own version, change the share code. Very important there. Make sure you change the share code. So that's right here, this little circle button here. That'll cycle the share code. And then you can publish your own version of Slender Stalker at your heart's content. So with that, I am out of time for today, but I will be back. Is there any questions from anyone before we wrap for today? All right. Well, thank you for joining so much, everybody. This has been a Bonfire build along. We are going to be doing more of these going forward, as well as game jams and hackathons. So please like and subscribe if you'd like to see more. And of course, we are always open to feedback. So feel free to also catch us on our Discord channel, which more will be in the description of this video later on. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, and take care.